بسم الله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Welcome, I welcome you here from Riwaq al-Azhar al-Sharif, um, virtually. I'm still in Glasgow actually. I pulled this up randomly, but now I realize that there's a nice munasaba because um, I actually studied a little bit from the book Mughni al-Labib, which we are seeing a summary from today. Here in Al-Azhar, and let me see, it would be on that side, over here, I think. No, over here, over here. In the I can't remember which how we call them. Riwaq al-Atrak, I think, with Sheikh Imad Affat, rahimahullah. So he was teaching Mughni al-Labib. Let me pull my copy up. Here we are. If we can show, this is, oh, there we go. Mughni al-Labib an Kutb al-Arif. This is the copy edited by Muhammad Muhyiddin Abdul Hamid. And it has some of my own scribbles and annotations. And some of those videos, in fact, probably all the videos that were done are available on the Azhar TV YouTube channel. And I remember I had to actually watch it at a distance sometimes because all the protests happened January 25th, 2011. We had to leave Egypt at that time. And in fact, it was the 18th was, they called it Jum'atul Ghadab, as I remember. So I flew out basically on the 18th, just because that was after my half-term exams in Al-Azhar. And so it was a while before we could come back into Egypt, those of us who left. So obviously February 11th, I think, is when Mubarak stepped down. And then it was probably the following month or more that I got back to Egypt. But I remember Sheikh Imad Affat starting one of his lessons with, you know, it was also al-Mawlid al-Nabawi, sallallahu alayhi wasallam, and he just mentioned, you know, some beautiful words, you know, saying, you know, how optimistic he is about Egypt, and how, you know, optimistic the remembrance of the beloved sallallahu alaihi wasallam made us feel. And he mentioned about, you know, may Allah protect the revolution, and then he just went straight on and let us return to the word an وَتَأْتِي isman. So he was reading, he just continued reading, and I felt that embodied something very beautiful about the connection of ilm and life, and how you have people like that who give you an inspiration about how to live the meaning of what we are studying. And obviously things have taken many different turns since that time. May Allah guide the people of Egypt to what is best. So, النوع الحادي والأربعون في معرفة إعرابه. I've been drumming up excitement about this chapter. I hope that you're feeling it. It gives you some concise rules, which are your guide to how I'rab is done and how it can go wrong. Now, this is not the basics of I'rab. We can take a book. You know, I have one as well. Maybe I'll pull that up as well. I don't have Muhammad, so I have to do this myself. Well, I've maybe packed that one away, but basically it's a book about Ilm al-I'rab, an introduction to Ilm al-I'rab. So one can study it from its basics, and it's essentially like Ilm al-Nahu. I mean, Ilm al-Nahu and al-I'rab are very closely intertwined, but some specific aspects about how we analyze. And what we can see here is like a masterclass from Sahib al-Mughni. Mughni al-Labib, he is hoping that we will be Labib And what would we say? Alibba, ulul albab. Anyway, we are supposed to be the people of intelligence who are going to be enriched and empowered to do i'rab without having to go constantly to the books of i'rab. So as I mentioned before, there is a tendency to talk up books which are, in tafsil al-i'rab. At the end of the day, the tafsil um, is only going to be tafsil once it goes through all the different options, right? If an i'rab work is going to tell you one i'rab of an ayah that actually has more ihtimal, then it's not mufassal. Mufassal would really mean to show you the potential in this ayah to be read this way and that way. And we've seen a lot of that in the chapters that have preceded. And we can see that also in some of the early works that are touched on here in the beginning of Imam al-Suyuti's chapter. In addition, I don't think he mentions I'rab al-Qur'an of An-Nahas, and before him al-Zajjaj, before him the books of Ma'ani al-Qur'an like al-Farra and al-Zajjaj. So these books are the earliest sources we have of this grammatical discussion of the Quran, and they become the basis for scholars having opinions later on. Generally, it goes back to these sources, so it is useful to have them as references, especially when you, like in a lot of things in tafsir, when you see a later mufassir referring to something, you may well understand it well from this later mufassir. They've clarified it, they've summarized it well. But sometimes when a later mufassir summarizes something, you're not sure that you understood the meaning. So it's always a good practice to have the usul, by which I mean, the earlier works that later scholars depended on, ummahat al-kutub if you like, and to refer to them. So even if, I trust Imam al-Alusi a great deal, but a lot of times I won't really quite grasp his ibara until I compare it with how the earlier scholar put it when they were advancing their opinion, right? Rather than it being later summarized or critiqued. So this is a general practice in tafsir and in other things. Sometimes you find that they summarize it in a way that you end up disagreeing with. I found that. Again, my paper, Fights and Flights, if you were to look around, there's a footnote I have about surhunna versus sirhunna. These are two qira'as. But in addition, there are different opinions about what each of them means. And whether sur means amilhunna, or whether sir means qatti'hunna, or whether it's the other way around, or that one of them can mean both and one of them is specifically chop, or one of them can mean both, the other one means specifically incline. So there are different points of view amongst the earlier scholars. And what I found is that Al-Farra was summarized by everyone who came after him in a certain way, which when I read Al-Farra for myself, I came to the conclusion, in fact, he's saying the other way around from what they took. Because once one person comes along and summarizes it, then other people take that summary. Right? They weren't all independently looking at Farra and summarizing him. Someone who did so early on became the source for all those who quoted Al-Farra's opinion later on. Incidentally, another example where I found that I disagree with how people summarize someone is Al-Imam al-Maturidi, when he talks about tafsir and ta'wil. So this is not in our chapters here, but at a certain point, Imam al-Suyuti also, he tells us what is Imam al-Maturidi's perspective on tafsir and ta'wil and the difference between them. And the way he summarizes it, for me, I'm not convinced that he has conveyed it accurately. But it depends what he was summarizing from, what was his source for Imam Maturidi's position. If the source is his Ta'wilat Ahl Sunnah or Ta'wilat al-Qur'an, which we have now in edited form published, then my point stands that al-Maturidi's position is something other than what as-Suyuti said, but maybe as-Suyuti had another source for it, or something has changed in the text or something like that. But the guide point I'm saying here is, do try to look directly at kalam al-ulama in their own books and not just those who summarize them later, because you might find something interesting. Okay, so let's have a listen to this discussion about i'rab.
النوع 41 في معرفة إعرابه. أفرده بالتصنيف خلائق، منهم مكي وكتابه في المشكل خاصة، والحوفي وهو أوضحها، وأبو البقاء العكبري وهو أشهرها، والسمين وهو من أجلها على ما فيه من حشو وتطويل، ولخصه السفاقسي فحرره، وتفسير أبي حيان مشحون بذلك. ومن فوائد هذا النوع معرفة المعنى، لأن الإعراب يميز المعاني ويوقف على أغراض المتكلمين. أخرج أبو عبيد في فضائله عن عمر بن الخطاب رضي الله عنه قال: تعلموا اللحن والفرائض والسنن كما تعلمون القرآن. وأخرج عن يحيى بن عتيق قال: قلت للحسن: يا أبا سعيد، الرجل يتعلم العربية يلتمس بها حسن النطق ويقيم بها قراءته. قال حسن: يا ابن أخي، فتعلمها، فإن الرجل يقرأ الآية فيعيا بوجهها فيهلك فيها.
So in the beginning he mentions some works, al-Ukbari's work, إملاء ما من به الرحمن من وجوه الإعراب والقراءات في جميع القرآن. So this is available, and a lot of times you'll see mufassirin saying قاله أبو البقاء or قاله al-Ukbari. Remember, he's known as Abu al-Baqa, so look out for that name. You'll know now who is being referred to, right? Al-Hawfi, I'm not sure if this one, I don't have a footnote on it, presumably because there wasn't one here in the MMF edition. Well, there is one, but it doesn't seem to be one that's published. Samir al-Halabi has got Ad-Dur al-Masoon, which you can consider to be a tafsir, but it is more limited in scope than a typical tafsir. So it is somewhere between a tafsir and an i'rab work. Right, just give me a moment. Again, these are the Muhammad put the lights on. I've been spoiled now. So, As-Samin al-Halabi, despite containing superfluous details and prolixity, I think I probably used that as a kind of I was trolling a little bit. Superfluous details and prolixity, just to kind of illustrate something about it. But I don't know if that's fair comment on Samin al-Halabi. It's a very, very valuable work, and he is a student of Abu Hayyan. So when he mentions that the tafsir of Abu Hayyan is rich in this, well, you can get the gist of Abu Hayyan's views also in As-Samin. Why is he called the fat man of Aleppo? I don't know. And nobody asked that in the chat. That was just that's a question that always comes to my mind, and I have actually read some opinions about this. Maybe he was himself Samin, or he was sometimes called Ibn Samin al-Halabi. So God knows. But you don't want to be known through all the generations like that. So, keep fit. Ya talabat al-ilm. Right, among the fruits of this field of inquiry is identifying meaning, because grammatical analysis distinguishes between possible meanings and specifies that which was intended by the speaker. How does this clash with something that we discussed earlier on? Can anyone remind me? What is the tension here that we were dealing with and we mentioned before? ومن فوائد هذا النوع معرفة المعنى. So that would imply the i'rab allows us to know the meaning. لأن الإعراب يميز المعاني ويوقف على أغراض المتكلمين. So the i'rab helps us to know أغراض المتكلمين. I've said here what was intended by the speaker. I said مراد المتكلم is how I put it. Right? It's often said مراد المتكلم, مراد الله في كلامه. Because we said the i'rab is based on the ma'na earlier. Right, so somehow these things have to coexist, and we have to just we have to be comfortable with the fact that there is a kind of circularity in which is generated from which. But crucially, and I don't think it was As-Suyuti kind of said this out loud earlier on, al-i'rab far'u al-ma'na. But as we're going to see in this chapter as well, why are certain i'rabs rejected? Because they don't gel with the meaning, right? So if it was the case that al-ma'na far'u al-i'rab, then we would simply say, well, that's the i'rab, so this is the ma'na, right? But this is not, it's not that this is false, it's just, let's understand it for what it is. Al-i'rab yumayyizu al-ma'ani, right? So by giving an ayah a certain i'rab, we are saying this is what I understand, this is the ma'na that I'm illustrating with this i'rab, right? لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ الْكُبْرَى. So when I say he saw some of, I can say min, he saw some of his Lord's greatest signs. That's probably the obvious i'rab of it, and therefore you've seen I've already started to give a spoiler here. I explained it to you through translation, right? I should have explained it through i'rab. I should be saying لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ min للتبعيض. آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ is therefore, you know, acted upon by min, and it's majroor, and obviously you understand mudaf ilayhi and mudaf ilayhi, right? Min ayati rabbihi. Okay, I don't need to spell out all the details. Al-kubra can be sifa for ayat. Ayati rabbihi. Al-kubra, ayat is ma'rifa because of the idafa to rabbihi. So al-kubra is a sifa for ayat. You follow this, inshallah. So what is the ma'na? What's very helpful is, and this, al-Suyuti is not going to tell you this because it's not his job, right? But I'm going to tell you this. Translation يميز المعاني. الترجمة تميز المعاني. So I can say then, based on this i'rab, the meaning is, or the translation is, indeed he saw some of the greatest signs of his Lord. So kubra, al-kubra is a sifa for the signs, the greatest signs of his Lord, right? But then you can have an alternative i'rab. لَقَدْ رَأَى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ. Let's take that as a phrase, a min phrase, which is متعلق with something that's going to come after, right? لَقَدْ رَأَى الْكُبْرى. الْكُبْرى is مفعول به. لَقَدْ رَأَى الْكُبْرى مِنْ آيَاتِ رَبِّهِ. Okay, and this is جوزه المفسرون. So you can say then the translation based on that is, he saw the greatest from among the signs of his Lord, right? So it could be the greatest one or the greatest however many from among. لقد رأى من آيات ربه الكبرى. لقد رأى الكبرى. لقد رأى الآية الكبرى من آيات ربه, right? So again, I'm not spelling out the i'rab, but I'm trying to make you see what I'm seeing and saying here, right? So a speaker might intend one or the other. So the speaker will, if they want to make sure that you understood, they will avoid an ambiguous phrasing. If they are happy with you, interpreting either way, then they may use ambiguous phrasing, because this can, فيه توسيع للمعاني, right? وإثراء, right? To enrich your speech, to allow the person to understand in more than one way. So if we understand it in this way, the translation would be different. So I want to say al-i'rab يميز المعاني, الترجمة تميز المعاني, ويوقف على أغراض المتكلمين. So a translator is trying to convey to the reader what the speaker intended. So you're trying to get the meaning, capture the meaning in a way that makes sense in the target language. So i'rab and tarjama are closely related then, right? When you are just dealing within Arabic and you want to explain the difference between different meanings and interpretations, you might have to spell out through i'rab, right? So let me get Tafsir al-Jalalain. Muhammad's not here, hold on. So let me see if I can show you. Right. It's disappearing in the Tafsir al-Jalalain. There we go. This is kind of a bootleg copy. Don't tell anyone I've got this, but I got it off Amazon. It's like a reprint thing. Translated by Faraz Hamza, whom I met in Palermo in September, and I had a chat with him about this work and this project and how he came to take part in it and some things he experienced in it. But you see, something like something like Tafsir al-Jalalain is not designed for translation. I'm sorry, Dr. Faraz, I'm sorry, Aisha Bewley, and whoever sets out to translate Tafsir al-Jalalain. It is not designed for that at all. Because, in fact, what people seem to maybe assume, and I mean the people who commission these projects, is if something is mukhtasar, it's easy to translate. But quite the opposite. The mukhtasar is not going to spell things out so much. It will refer to things obliquely. And it will do so a lot of the time just by giving you the i'rab or something. It just says sifa, badal. Right? Let me look in the Fatiha, for example. I'm pretty sure there's something. So what happens then is something is easier to translate when it is mutawwal. When a person is elaborating more, it's actually easier to translate. Yes, it takes longer because there's more words. But these al-Jalalain could be used as a guide to translating the Quran. An i'rab of the Quran, which of course Jalalain is more than that, it's tafsir, but a lot of it is just giving you the i'rab. It can give you the guide to translate the Quran. It doesn't actually tell you enough because it's only got some details and leaves out many other things. That's why, for example, when Jibril Haddad has translated one volume so far and released one volume so far of his translation of Al-Baydawi, he claims that in the beginning he has given a Baydawian rendering of the Quran. A Baydawian rendering. So the idea would be, okay, Haddad is reading Tafsir al-Baydawi, he's translating Tafsir al-Baydawi, he's closely looking at what al-Baydawi is saying. So then when he comes to give the translation of the ayah, he gives one that al-Baydawi would be happy with. So that's a nice concept. I'm on board with that. But al-Baydawi does not give you enough detail to make such a claim, right? So when Haddad says, in the name of the one God, something like that, that's how we translate Bismillah. Did al-Baydawi say, Bismil ilah al-Wahid? Did he tell you to translate it in that particular way? That's a choice that comes from the translator. And when you do that, you can't then attribute it to al-Baydawi because he did not give you enough information. That's problem number one with this proposition. Problem number two is, what about when al-Baydawi actually gives you two wajhain or thalathat awjuh in the meaning of an ayah, in the i'rab of a particular phrase? You can't, you can, but Haddad doesn't translate both of those in order to say Baydawi is saying it's this or this. So a Baydawian rendering in reality would have to incorporate the multiplicity of views, and it has to somehow account for things that al-Baydawi does not spell out for you. So coming back to the Jalalain, let me just open up with the Fatiha, for example. غير المغضوب عليهم, the path of those whom you have favored with guidance. From الذين together with its relative clause is substituted by غير المغضوب عليهم. I can't really make too much of this example. I was thinking about بدل and صفة and غير المغضوب عليهم. But basically, a lot of the things are then a translation of an i'rab, a translation of a grammatical point that an English reader who doesn't know Arabic, therefore how would they know i'rab, and how would they know how to make sense of that i'rab? That's just the problem that you get into when you translate this kind of thing. And as you know, we've seen that plenty in the tafsir of Ibn Juzay, again because such things are not designed for translation. But we're making the best of it that we can. It's saying here, for example, I would say for us, Hamza is doing his best, the best that he could have been expected to do with this task. But it is, it's a grammatical text. Laman, the lam denotes part of the subject of the sentence and is semantically connected to what precedes it. The man introduces the relative clause. Lamathubatun, verily the reward is the subject. The lam is that of oaths, and min indillahi khayrun, from God would have been better, is the predicate. And these are even not the most complicated things, predicates and so on. But how is a person who just wants to read the tafsir to understand what the Quran is saying, how would they actually get anything out of that? What is actually useful, potentially, is to take this, linguistic information and to translate the Quran accordingly. So you could say al-Suyuti in this case, that is al-Suyuti's tafsir. I didn't actually even mean that connection here, but it's al-Suyuti's tafsir in the beginning of Al-Jalalain, and he is telling us that this is what the grammar means. So when translating it, we say al-Suyuti is telling us the ayah can mean this or this, and what we do is we translate the Quran accordingly. That at least becomes meaningful for someone who's trying to read the tafsir in English. As for someone who wants the grammatical information as it is, they really ought to go to the Arabic tafsir itself, and they really ought to learn Arabic enough to be able to read the Arabic tafsir itself. Not least because there are translators who do well and there are translators who do badly, and to be at the mercy of these translators is not the smartest strategy. Right. So these are some beginning discourses. I know you don't mind these things, but we want to move on. The I'rab chapter is not long, by the way. So I'm aiming to finish today basically the Qawa'id part and then the Qawa'id of I'rab. And then for the next session, we will cover the other stuff that is treated in this chapter. So here we have seen this transmission from Umar radiallahu anhu. So as I told you before, when we were looking at the riwayat around Gharib al-Qur'an, A'rib al-Qur'an, waltamisu ghara'ibahu, this kind of thing, you have to just notice that there are certain words that are used, and you're going to have to figure out from context what they were meaning by it, because it can't be, you can't just assume that it means what is later meant by these terms. So al-lahn is tricky. Learn al-lahn. Now, you could say al-lahn is error. As a more precise, it would seem to refer to error, awareness of which entails awareness of its opposite. So that's how I've made sense of the idea of learn al-lahn. This is it. تعلموا اللحن والفرائض والسنن كما تعلمون أي تتعلمون القرآن. So how do I get the sense that that's what it means? By the fact that al-Suyuti is quoting it here in this context, and the fact that Abu Ubaid has reported it presumably in the same kind of context in Fada'il al-Qur'an. If you just came across this out in the wild, this saying, it might not be obvious that al-lahn has got anything to do with grammar, right? You might think, I don't know, errors in fiqh, for example, I don't know, right? تعلموا اللحن والفرائض والسنن. But once they place it in a context of a discussion, then it gives it a meaning, right? So there's a sir in this. I don't know if I should mention it. Some asrar should be kept asrar. If you think about this for a second, when we have a hadith, that are used as tafsir, who attached each hadith to the ayah? that it is thought to be the tafsir of? I mean, that's an open question. I'm not really expecting you to answer. I want you to ponder on that. At what point did we understand that this hadith is relevant to that ayah? Is that itself from the Prophet ﷺ? In some cases, yes. In some cases, the Prophet ﷺ might have said something and then recited an ayah, and so you would understand that what he just said is relevant to this ayah, or this ayah is relevant to elaborate or to illustrate what he said, or what he said helps you to understand a dimension of the ayah. You know, and that is a bit different from saying this is the meaning of the ayah. Right? If the ayah is quoted and then the Prophet ﷺ said it means this, right? There are examples of that as well. That's different from quoting the ayah while in the midst of some other point and discussion, right? And Ibn Ashur has an interesting discussion on this, I think, in the 9th introduction to his tafsir, where he gives the example of where the Sahabi was praying and the Prophet ﷺ called him. And he did, you know, the Sahabi continued his prayer, and then the Prophet ﷺ said to him afterwards, "Why did you not come when I called you?" Allah says, "Istajibu lillahi walirrasuli idha da'akum lima yuhyikum." Right, so to check the wording. But the point is that doesn't tell you then that the ayah means that when you're praying, you should break your prayer if the Prophet ﷺ calls you. I mean, for whom is that meaning going to be relevant? The ayah has a meaning which is broader than all of that. And in a way, he's showing, if you understood that ayah well, then you would have acted like this in this particular situation which arises for you as a Sahabi. Yes. يا الذين آمنوا استجيبوا لله وللرسول إذا دعاكم لما يحييكم واعلموا أن الله يحول بين المرء وقلبه وأنه إليه تحشرون. Al-Anfal 24. So then you know, various the Sahaba and the Tabi'een and the scholars in general have, you know, put hadith next to certain ayahs. Even if there's no ayah mentioned in the hadith, they will just put it there because it's been understood as helping in some way and shedding some light on the ayah. So then we have the books of hadith in which, you know, they're organized by their abwab, and then they're organized sometimes by saying, you know, fi tafsir hadhi al-ayah, and then they'll mention some hadith which might not be explicitly a hadith of tafsir, but that they do help you with tafsir. And then you have the books like Ad-Durr al-Manthur, or you have obviously the earlier tafsir as well, Ibn Abi Hatim and Al-Tabari, and then you have Ad-Durr al-Manthur. And the point is then, somebody makes a connection. And then once you make that connection, it's like, it becomes difficult to, oh, I have to do the muting. Do the muting, there we go. Please mute yourselves when you come to class, but I can do it as well. So then it becomes difficult to understand the ayah without that hadith, and to understand the hadith without the ayah. But like any hadith, like this applies outside the field of tafsir as well, to know the context in which it was said is, you know, can be very difficult to determine, and without knowing that context, the meaning can be difficult to determine, right? So it all depends on what situation that was said in, and they call this sometimes sabab al-wurud, or, you know, something like that in hadith, which parallels what we, you know, the concerns we have over sabab al-nuzul of ayat of the Qur'an. Sometimes, you know, the meaning of an ayah might not be clear, or might seem to be something else until we understand that this was the context in which it was revealed. Then okay, in that case, this is what it would mean. This is what the implication would be. This is what the ruling would be, right? Otherwise, we would have taken it on face value, taken it on its itlaq and its umum, and not understood some aspects of takhsis and taqeed that should be borne in mind. Okay, so it's not relevant to our subject of Arab, sorry, but relevant to when you have sayings like this. Yeah. Speaking of taking things out of context, because I know you like my rants about mistakes that people make. The other day I saw a video. Someone was talking about how the Prophet ﷺ, he used in there's a hadith that tells us that when he would go to someone's home and knock on the door, while waiting, he would step to one side out of adab and respecting that person's, the privacy of the people of the household, because when the door opens, maybe in the background somebody is there and exposed in some way. So this is a beautiful illustration of adab as embodied by the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the person who was speaking, then in the midst of it, he said, because Allah says, "Inna buyutana awra," and then he went on to translate that our houses are awra. So maybe, do you see the problem? Yeah, Muhammad sees it, I think. So the ayah is Al-Ahzab 13. وَإِذْ قَالَتْ طَائِفَةٌ مِّنْهُمْ مِّمَّنْ. Go back one ayah. وَإِذْ يَقُولُ الْمُنَافِقُونَ وَالَّذِينَ فِي قُلُوبِهِمْ مَرَضٌ مَا وَعَدَنَا اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا وإذ قالت طائفة منهم يا أهل يثرب لا مقام لكم فارجعوا. Then ويستأذن فريق منهم أي من المنافقين. انتبهتم؟ يستأذن فريق منهم النبي ويقولون إن بيوتنا عورة. And then Allah says وما هي بعورة إن يريدون إلا فرارا. So we won't get to a long discourse on the use of this ayah. But you see, it's like, I think this person is a hafiz, بس كن حافظا فاهما. Especially if you're going to do istishhad with kalam Allah. Maybe even you could have seen that, وَمَا هِيَ بِعَوْرَةٍ. Although, I don't think that's a conclusive point that we cannot say. Because the point is, their homes are not an awra in the way that they intended, that our homes are exposed, therefore we cannot participate, we need to protect our homes, they're exposed to the enemy, etc., right? So Allah says, وَمَا هِيَ بِعَوْرَةٍ. Now, maybe the homes are awra in the way that the speaker wants to indicate and illustrate with the hadith as well. But the istishhad with the ayah, لَيْسَ فِي مَحَلِّهِ الْبَتَّةِ, right? You simply cannot say, because Allah says, إِنَّ بُيُوتَنَا عَوْرَةٌ. Right? So, this happens, people take something from the Quran and they apply it in a certain context, then it gets into people's minds and they think that's the meaning of the ayah, right? So that relates to what I'm saying here about the qawl here. Based on the fact that it's mentioned here, I understand al-lahn means grammar in some way. Then I have to do some kind of thought process of how could the word al-lahn mean grammar? But it has to, because that's the whole point and why he's telling us this thing, right? But then people will hear that and they will think Allah's called our houses al-awra, so we should cover our houses in thick black cloth and just leave a little gap for for the people to look out of the house. Okay, this is the problem of sometimes people quoting the Quran in its without grasping the context in which it should be said.
الناظر في كتاب الله تعالى الكاشف عن أسراره وعلى الناظر في كتاب الله تعالى الكاشف عن أسراره النظر في الكلمة وصيغتها ومحلها ككونها مبتدأ أو خبرا أو فاعلا أو مفعولا أو في مبادئ الكلام أو في جواب إلى غير ذلك.
Right. So this saying again, to be honest, I struggled with this translation here. This is what I ended up with. I'll put it in yellow. If anyone's got any suggestions to improve it, then feel free to send them my way. So قلت للحسن يا أبا سعيد الرجل يتعلم العربية ويلتمس بها حسن المنطق. So I've said what if because of what I ended up seeing as like the whole thing. It just looks like a person does it, right? In order to achieve correct speech and reading. Husn al-mantiq, of course, is not going to be logic. Mantiq is here, علمنا منطق الطير, right? ويقيم بها قراءته, to achieve correct speech and reading. He says, حسن يا ابن أخي فتعلمها فإن الرجل يقرأ الآية فيعيا بوجهها فيهلك فيها. So I guess I had an alternative understanding which I have not documented. Maybe I should put a footnote. You see, يعيا is something like would wear out and become exhausted, right? Trying to understand it. بوجهها, that is to get and understand its correct meaning and i'rab or whatever. فيعيا بوجهها. But then فيهلك فيها, what does he mean? Perish in it, right? So either it could mean he struggles to understand it and then he just like fails completely and is defeated. But then how is that an answer to what Yahya has said to him, right? So I guess I ended up here. I may fail to understand it and perish as a result of the misunderstanding, because that seems to be more a way of encouraging someone to actually go ahead and study Arabic, right?
يجب عليه مراعاة أمور، أحدها وهو أول واجب عليه أن يفهم معنى ما يريد أن يعيبه مفردا أو مركبا قبل الإعراب، فإنه فرع المعنى، ولهذا لا يجوز إعراب فواتح السور إذا قلنا بأنها من المتشابه الذي استأثر الله بعلمه. وقالوا في
Okay, so there it's been spelled out now, okay? فإنه فرع المعنى. So give attention to each word and its form and role, for example, the nominal, subject or predicate, subject or object, and so on. Thus, you must observe the following considerations. So this is where we're going to start in a list. I forgot how many items there are in the list. I think it's 10. So we're going to go through these one by one, covering the rules. And these are, of course, as I said before, from Mughni al-Labib. Why has al-Suyuti not sort of made it clear that he's just summarizing Mughni al-Labib? I don't know. But there you go. Let me just see if I can check how many items there are. There are 12. There are 12 rules. So forget Jordan Peterson's 12 rules. These are the 12 rules that you need to be a person of i'rab. Clean your room and then do your i'rab according to these 12 rules.
توجيه نصب كلالة في قوله تعالى وإن كان رجل يورث كلالة إنه يتوقف على المراد بها فإنه كان اسما للميت فإن كان اسما للميت فهو حال ويورث خبر كان أو صفة وكان تامة أو ناقصة وكلالة خبر أو للورثة فهو على تقدير مضاف أي ذا كلالة وهو أيضا حال أو خبر كما تقدم أو للقرابة فهو مفعول لأجله. وقوله تعالى سبعا من المثاني إن كان المراد بالمثاني القرآن فمن للتبعيض أو كان المراد بالمثاني الفاتحة فلبيان الجنس. وقوله إلا أن تتقوا منهم تقاه إن كان بمعنى الاتقاء فهي مصدر أو بمعنى متقي أي أمرا يجب اتقاؤه فمفعول به أو جمعا كرمات فحال. وقوله تعالى غثاء أحوى إن أريد به الأسود من الجفاف واليبس فهو صفة لغثاء أو إن كان من شدة الخضرة فحال من المرعى. قال ابن هشام وقد زلت أقدام كثير من المعيبين راعوا في الإعراب ظاهر اللفظ ولم ينظروا في موجب المعنى.
Okay, so we'll continue with that in a moment after we look at these examples. So the point is that you start with the meaning, right? You start by cleaning your room of meaning, right? And then you are able to then say, accordingly, the i'rab would be as such, right? Because al-i'rabu far'u al-ma'na. So here in this ayah, I have a very busy footnote. And I think I have updated this. I think I've updated this after improving my understanding of it a bit. So in this ayah, in Surah An-Nisa, the word kalala, there are three opinions as to what does kalala refer to. Accordingly, the meaning and the Arab will have to shift to accommodate those three different meanings. So the first view, that kalala is referring to the deceased, that is to say, a person, a deceased person who has left neither antecedents or descendants, right? So he has no living parents and no living children, basically, right? So if it refers to the deceased, then إن كان رجل يورث كلالة, right? So he is the kalala, right? The rajul is yurath and he is kalala. That's the first view about the word kalala. Then it may be an accusative of circumstance, a hal, which I now just call circumstantive. That would be easier. And the preceding clause, yurathu, is the predicate of kana, if deficient. I put in brackets. That is to say, kana having ism and khabar. When kana rajulun, and then yurathu is the khabar of kana. Alternatively, that clause may be adjectival if is a sifa, if kana is tamma. So that's this. Then it may also be within the same view about kalala, that kana is deficient and kalalatan is its predicate. Right, so this gives rise to following literal translations. And here's the bit, like if I put this into the tafsir translation, ain't nobody ever gonna get any sense from that of what on earth we are talking about. But what I can do is say, the first possibility is that it means if a man is inherited whilst being kalala, i.e. without parents or children surviving. Number two, if there is a man who is inherited whilst being kalala. Number three, if a man who is inherited should be kalala. Right? So subtle differences, but different nonetheless. And that all goes down to saying the word kalala means the person who does not have, the up and the down heirs. Second possibility, if it refers to the heirs, if the kalala refers to the heirs, I'll explain this in the footnote. Heirs not including parents and children, right? So if he has other heirs that are not parents and children, that could be the meaning of the word kalala. Then a mudaf is taken as implied, dha kalalatin. And then it can either be circumstance or predicate as previously described. Therefore, the notional translations are, if a man is inherited whilst having kalala, i.e. heirs not including parents and children. If there is a man who is inherited whilst having kalala, and 6, if a man who is inherited should have kalala. Right? Yes. So that gives 3 options as it did before, because there's a branch of regarding kana being tamma or naqisa. If, however, it is taken to mean family relation, then it is an accusative purpose, maf'ul li ajlihi. Hence, if a man is inherited due to kalala, and kalala here means family, extended relations. If a man is inherited due to kalala, or if there be a man who is inherited due to kalala. Okay. Okay. Mu'mina, are you trying to say iklil? But anyway, we're not going into the subject of what does kalala mean. We're saying, based on different opinions of what kalala means, there is a variety of iklil, I think, iklil, like this. So then there are different possibilities about the Arab, and as such there would be different translations. If a person wants to translate the Quran, then they should be able to distinguish between these awjuh. If they cannot distinguish between these awjuh, then what are they able to distinguish between? Right? If you can't understand the difference that arises from something being in this grammatical position or that grammatical position, right? This is just a little workshop of an ayah, right? So I actually have set this as a workshop once. I gave it to a group and said, like, try to work out based on these, what are the notional translations. If you can't do that, then you need to rise to that challenge. But that means that you wouldn't be able to distinguish then when the mufassir are telling you that such and such is a hal or is a sifa or whatever. You can guess, but you wouldn't be ala bayyinatin min amrik until you're able to distinguish between them. So this is a good one to test people with. Test them with kalala, as the famous saying goes. Right, sab'an min al-mathani. If that refers to the Quran itself, if the mathani means the Quran itself, then we gave you 7 from among. But if the mathani refers to al-Fatiha, then we gave you 7 which are the mathani, right? The different types of min then, which follow from how we understand. 7 from among the oft-repeated verses, or 7 verses that are oft-repeated. Okay, because the Quran is referred to in Surah Al-Zumar as being mathani, right? Not called al-mathani, but it's called Allahu nazzala ahsan al-hadithi kitaban mutashabihan mathani. So it can be said that mathani refers to the whole Quran. إلا أن تتقوا منهم تقاتا. If tuqat is a masdar, meaning caution, then it has the i'rab of a masdar, that is to say maf'ul mutlaq. If tuqat is a thing to be aware of, then it is maf'ul bihi, direct object. Or if it is a plural, like we have rumat. Okay, I started changing the transliteration scheme here. Then that is an accusative of circumstance, a circumstantive. Hal. Okay, so the translations: except that you be very cautious of them, except that you beware something harmful from them, except that you beware of them while being cautious. I have a Twitter thread related to this ayah, and it is about the opinion, the interpretation of Islahi and Muhammad Inayatullah Subhani regarding this ayah. I'll see if I can just share it with you, but I don't know how I'll share it with people watching the video, but you can find it if you search under my profile. Notes on an alternative interpretation of the Taqiyya verse, and in it I discuss what their contentions are around the normal interpretations and their very alternative understanding that they have, and some problems that face that, and comparing it with some other ayahs structurally. I don't know when I had such time to do such things, but there you go. Ahwa, a dark hue. It could be describing the stubble or intense greenery, and then it gives different meanings. Who brings out the pasture, then makes it dark stubble, or who brings out the pasture, later making it stubble in its intense greenery. So in order to translate tafsir actually as well, like to translate the Quran according to tafsir is one thing. To translate tafsir also, we need to have a sense of what the different grammatical options are being presented by the mufassir, and what the difference in meaning is that comes from them. Okay, Qala ibn Hisham, our main man. Many grammarians slipped up when they looked only at the apparent meaning of the words and failed to take their implications into account. I don't think I like how we translated apparent meaning here, because he's saying the most obvious kind of sense, almost robotically looking at the ayah, like a machine. And you get machine translations now. If we were to enter this into Google Translate, I wonder what we'll get. I expect we will get the mistake that Ibn Hisham is pointing to. We can try it as an experiment, right? But here, for example, in this ayah, if you just look at it quickly, you'd see an natruka aw an naf'ala. And you would think, oh, an naf'ala has the same kind of position in the sentence as an natruka. But there's a problem with that, as he says.
من ذلك قوله تعالى أصلاتك تأمرك أن نترك ما يعبد آباؤنا أو أن نفعل في أموالنا ما نشاء فإنه يتبادر إلى الذهن عطف أن نفعل على أن نترك وذلك باطل لأنه لم يأمرهم أن يفعلوا في أموالهم ما يشاءون وإنما هو عطف على ما فهو معمول للترك والمعنى أن نترك أن تفعل وموجب الوهن المذكور أن المعرب يرى أن والفعل مرتين وبينهما حرف العطف. الأمر الثاني يجب أن
Okay, so then he goes on to rule number 2. So the example here, I hope you see, you think an naf'ala conjoined to an natruka, but then what's the problem here? As-salatuka, they're saying to Shu'aib alayhi salam, ta'muruka an natruka wa ta'muruka an naf'ala fi amwalina ma nasha. Right? So that is not the meaning. The translation then, does your prayer command you that we abandon what our fathers worship, or that we do with our wealth whatever we wish? This or shouldn't be, does it command you that we abandon, and command you that we do with our wealth whatever we wish? That is not the meaning that is intended. Instead, it's following from what's abandoned. Does your prayer command you that we abandon, number 1, what our fathers worship, number 2, or that we abandon doing with our wealth whatever we wish? So here we could look to the translations. I'm tempted to do it, but I don't know what I'm always scared what I'm going to find. Right, let's see. If I go to, you see the translation that I put there is probably Yusuf Ali's. So we can say Yusuf Ali here. Leave off the worship which our fathers practiced, or that we leave off doing. No, so that's fine. Yusuf Ali's translation is fine. So maybe I've given a kind of literal translation, ambiguous translation to illustrate the point, right? Who do we think would have a good or bad translation? Let's see. You can say it in the chat. It won't be saved. No one will see who you suggested. Let's see. Muhammad asked, does their habit of praying, there's a whole discussion about salatuka, but let's leave that aside, compel thee to demand of us that we give up all that our forefathers were wont to worship, or that we refrain from doing? That's fine, whatever we please. So as long as you understand this last phrase, that we refrain from doing, and you put something there to make the reader understand that as well, then you're fine. Let's see, who else do we have? Sahih. Command you that we should leave what our father worship, or not do with our wealth what we please. It just kind of inserts the word not, which at least fixes the potential problem. Does the prayer command you that we should not do with our wealth? So it fixes it, but it leaves the direct i'rab of an natruka an naf'ala, right, which is the intended, to leave off doing with our wealth what we please. Bewley. Do your prison structure we should abandon what our fathers worshipped, or stop doing? Okay, so we seem to be safe with the ones that we looked at, and refrain from doing, not deal. So that means that the translators, whether they were strong on the Arab or not, is the point is they did look to the meaning and felt like there has to be a not here somewhere, or refrain from. Here, this one has put in brackets because they felt it's not actually explicit in the ayah. But if you see the Arab as the al-atf ala ma, then it is explicit in the ayah. It just depends upon reading it correctly. So some of them have added this should forsake to do, because they felt like it's not there and it needs to be inserted, not. So we seem to be okay. I'm not checking every single one. But then also, if the earlier people got it right, look, Pickthall thinks it's not there, that we should leave off. I mean, so forsake and leave off is the same word, natruka. So if the earlier ones got it right, then the later ones probably get it right because they copy the earlier ones. No offense. Just saying. I don't know what bridges have because, I mean, I can look if you're really interested because I've got it here, right? So 1187. But we seem to be generally in safe hands in the translations of the ayah. 1187. O Shu'aib, does your prayer command you that we abandon what our fathers worship, or that we should not do with our wealth whatever we will? With no brackets or anything. So it's interesting because the literal ayah does not have any not. It's not the word not, but it's like maybe people felt it's needed for the meaning. Okay. So let's look at the second rule.
راعي ما تقتضيه الصناعة، فربما راعى المعرب وجها صحيحا ولا ينظر في صحته في الصناعة فيخطئ. من ذلك قول بعضهم: وثمود فما أبقى، إن ثمودا مفعول مقدم، وهذا ممتنع، لأن لما النافية الصدر، فلا يعمل ما بعدها فيما قبلها، بل هو معطوف على عادا، أو على تقدير وأهلك ثمودا. وقول بعضهم في قوله تعالى: لا عاصم اليوم من أمر الله، لا تثريب عليكم اليوم، يقول إن الظرف متعلق باسم لا، وهو باطل، لأن اسم لا حينئذ مطول فيجب نصبه وتنوينه، وإنما هو متعلق بمحذوف. وقول الحوفي إن الباء من قوله تعالى فناظرة بما يرجع المرسلون متعلقة بناظرة هو باطل، لأن الاستفهام له الصدر، بل هو متعلق بما بعده. وكذا قول غيره في قوله تعالى ملعونين أينما ثقفوا، إنه حال من معمول ثقفوا أو أخذوا، هو باطل، لأن الشرط له الصدر، بل هو منصوب على الذم. الأمر الثالث.
So the basic point is here, Arab has its rules. You have to make sure to follow them, but this point is put after paying attention to the meaning.
أن يكون مليا بالعربية لئلا يخرج على ما لم يثبت. الأمر الثالث أن يكون ملما بالعربية لئلا يخرج على ما لم يثبت، كقول أبي عبيدة في قوله تعالى كما أخرجك ربك إن الكاف قسم، حكاه مكي وسكت عليه، فشنع ابن الشجري عليه في سكوته، ويبطله أن الكاف لم تجئ بمعنى واو القسم، وإطلاق ما الموصولة على الله وربط الموصول بالظاهر وهو فاعل أخرجك، وباب ذلك الشعر. وأقرب ما قيل في الآية إنها مع مجرورها خبر محذوف، أي هذه الحال من تنفيذك الغزاة على ما رأيت في كراهتهم لها، كحال إخراجك للحرب في كراهيتهم لها. وكقول ابن مهران في قراءة
So وباب ذلك الشعر, that's one heck of an insult in this context, in this type of work. It's like, okay, you can get away with it, as for what they say ضرورة الشعر, or a bit like what we say poetic license in English, and it's not an appropriate i'rab, in the Quran, right? I mean, you get some very nice expressions. Just the other day, I was reading something. It was to do with so I was looking into an ayah because I was perplexed by a certain translation. It was a majestic Quran translation, Musharraf Hussain, and he's got for قُلْ مَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًّا لِجِبْرِيلَ فَإِنَّهُ نَزَّلَهُ عَلَى قَلْبِكَ بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. So قُلْ مَنْ كَانَ عَدُوًّا لِجِبْرِيلَ, as far as I understood, it would be اتفاق that this is shartiya, then فَإِنَّهُ is in the position of the jawab. But he translated it as ask, who is an enemy to Jibreel? Question mark. He sent it down on your heart, etc. Right? So he puts that as a separate sentence, ignoring the fa. So I thought, okay, this doesn't work at all. I wonder if any of the Mufassirin have said it. So I went to Tafsir al-Alusi. That's where I look to see if anyone said something and has been commented on. So Alusi mentions it sort of after some other stuff, and he mentions it and he says, هذا مما لا ينبغي أن يرتكب في القرآن. Right? مما لا ينبغي أن يرتكب في القرآن. So for translations to follow that means that either they are confident enough, to override the opinion of people like Al-Alusi, or they simply did not do ta'ammul on the matters of i'rab and syntax. However, I think maybe this goes back to Ahmed Reza Khan's translation in Urdu. I didn't look at it, but I noticed that the other ones who did that were those who were translating Ahmed Reza Khan's translation into English. They put it as a question: who is an enemy to Jibreel? In which case it would have to be thought of as like a rhetorical question, like who would be an enemy to Jibreel? Right? So then translated like that, who would be? Who would dare to be? Who could possibly be an enemy to Jibreel? After all, he is the one who did this and this and this. So, when analyzing translations, you want to say, first of all, like you might have something that is unfamiliar to you, it doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. And then you can go into the tafsir and say, can I find some support for this? Can I identify the wajh that they are depending on? Whether they went to the tafsir or not, this is not the point. They might have just thought of that for themselves, and it might correspond with something that was mentioned in tafsir. But then with tafsir al-Alusi, we can also see the critical comments that have been made about such things. And his criticism is not to be taken lightly. One could certainly disagree if one is really convinced that it is a question, who is an enemy to Jibreel? Right. Can't remember how we got onto that. But the question of ka being for qasam doesn't seem to exist. So acquainted with Arabic would mean, the lahjat and, lisan al-Arab qadiman, the Arabic poetry, things that exist, things that don't exist. Is there any shahid for it? If there's no shahid for it, it's not a strong wajh. One could perhaps still say like the ma'na demands something. Yaqtadi, demands. My Ibn Juzay students know this reference, right? So it could be that you are going to claim, actually, I believe the Quran is using this kaf for qasam. But if it was never used that way in Kalam al-Arab, you don't have a strong case for what you're saying. That's really the point here.
إن البقرة تشابهت بتشديد التاء. إنه من زيادة التاء في أول الماضي، ولا حقيقة لهذه القاعدة، وإنما أصل القراءة إن البقرة تشابهت بتاء الوحدة، ثم أدغمت في تاء تشابهت، فهو إدغام من كلمتين. قراءة ابن مهران إن البقرة تشابهت. الأمر الرابع أن يتجنب الأمور البعيدة والأوجه الضعيفة واللغات الشاذة، ويخرج على القريب والقوي والفصيح، فإن لم يظهر فيه إلا الوجه البعيد فله عذر، وإن ذكر الجميع لقصد الإغراب والتكثير فصعب شديد، أو لبيان المحتمل وتدريب الطالب فحسن في غير.
So you want as a mu'arib, have you ever thought of yourself as a mu'arib? You can be, after today, you can be a mu'arib labib, right? So you want to avoid the strange explanations and start off with what is the easiest, clearest, most frequent way of explaining something, right? So someone sent me a question the other day about the ayah that was mentioned above. وَلَقَدْ آتَيْنَاكَ سَبْعًا مِنَ الْمَثَانِ وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ. And they said, could it be وَالْقُرْآنَ الْعَظِيمِ? The wa is for ma'iyya. So then it would mean we have given you the 7 oft repeated with the glorious Quran. So I said to him, what's wrong with atf? Atf just means and what is the difference in and with? The idea that waw can mean with, especially, is maybe necessary in some circumstances, and I think at the end of this chapter we will see a discussion of this as some examples. There was one mentioned earlier, but then there's actually a few more examples come in this chapter, where the mu'aribun said this could be waw al-ma'iyya. So you don't reach for it when waw al-atf is available, right? So we have given you the seven oft repeated, and you can even translate it as with the glorious Quran, but you don't have to go to the i'rab of waw al-ma'iyah, right? Um, start with what is most clear and evident.
ألفاظ القرآن. أما التنزيل فلا يجوز أن يخرج إلا على ما يغلب على الظن إرادته، فإن لم يغلب شيء فليذكر الأوجه المحتملة من غير تعسف. ومن ثم خطئ من قال في قوله تعالى وقيله بالجر أو النصب إنه عطف على لفظ الساعة أو محلها لما بينهما من التباعد، والصواب أنه قسم أو مصدر قال مقدرا. ومن قال في قوله إن الذين كفروا بالذكر إن خبره أولئك ينادون من مكان بعيد، الصواب أنه محذوف. ومن قال في صاد والقرآن للذكر إن جوابه إن ذلك لحق، الصواب أنه محذوف، أي ما الأمر كما زعموا، أو إنه لمعجز، أو إنك لمن المرسلين. ومن قال في قوله تعالى فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف، إن الوقف على جناح وعليه إغراء، لأن إغراء الغائب ضعيف، بخلاف القول بمثل ذلك في قوله عليكم ألا تشركوا فإنه حسن، لأن إغراء المخاطب فصيح. ومن قال في قوله ليذهب عنكم.
So there's various examples here related to i'rab, but in addition we can see here something about waqf. So that discussion can happen separately in the in teaching qira'ah and tajweed and so on, because we learn about wuquf, but it is intimately connected with nahu, right? Because what makes a waqf hasan or tam or kafi or qabih or waqfu ta'assuf, etc., relates to the meaning and relates to the i'rab, right? So it's all one field in reality. So some people would say in this ayah فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف, they would stop like this, فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف. What would lead them to this? This ayah has a certain ishkal in it, and the ishkal is partly cleared up by the sabab nuzul, as we said before, right? In the ayah, إن الصفا والمروة من شعائر الله فمن حج البيت أو اعتمر فلا جناح عليه أن يطوف بهما. What's the status of the sa'i, as we call it? Interestingly, the Quran doesn't call it sa'i, it calls it tawaf, أن يطوف بهما. We use tawaf only for the Kaaba, and we say sa'i, that may be based on the hadith and so on. But anyway, the Quranic word is أن يطوف بهما, to go around as-Safa and Marwa. So what is the status of that when doing Hajj and Umrah? It is not just circumambulation. Okay, but what's the ruling? What's the ruling of sa'i mandatory? Okay, so we cannot just say there's no sin on you, but the implication then is ibaha. That sounds like ibaha, right? So when explaining this ayah, they say the sabab nuzul clarifies it, because there were at that time or even after they were removed, there were some idols placed on Safa and Marwa, and they have a whole story about these idols and how they came to be there, etc. But anyway, كانوا يتحرجون, right? So the Ashab al-Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they felt some reservation about going there, because those who were doing the tawaf and Safa and Marwa were doing so for the idols, and now people are supposed to do it in order to reinstitute the correct rituals of Hajj. Or even if people were doing the ritual as it was received from Ibrahim alayhi salam, it was mixed in with the idolatry. So here it's saying, when you do the tawaf or when you do the sa'i, don't think that there's any sin in you doing that. لا جناح عليه أن يطوف بهما, right? But maybe someone else has seen this ayah and thought of a different solution. So they want to say, عليه أن يطوف, right? So عليه is an expression for making something mandatory. So he ought to go around them both. And then فلا جناح just as a separate sentence, but then it's followed up with this explicit statement of obligation, or إغراء grammatically, but more than that, fiqhically, right? But such is not eloquent in the third person as here, because normally we say عليك بكذا وكذا, right? The same does not apply to the similar claim for عليكم ألا تشركوا به شيئا. It doesn't give us the whole ayah. كتب ربكم. Sorry, we will look at the ayah. I should probably put that in the footnote here. So ayah 151, is it? Of Al-An'am. قل تعالوا أتل ما حرم ربكم. And then عليكم ألا تشركوا به شيئا. So this is actually interesting, because there as well in that ayah there is a reason to reach for this slightly counterintuitive reading, because قل تعالوا أتل ما حرم ربكم عليكم. Normally one would stop here. ألا تشركوا به شيئا. So one would maybe trip up here by reading حرم ألا تشركوا. Right? You see the problem? If you take that literally, he forbade you not committing shirk. Obviously that's not the meaning. Nobody sensible would trip up like that. You would do taqdeer here in one way or another, right? And I'm sure we covered it in the tafsir of Ibn Juzay as well. So there's one taqdeer or another taqdeer to solve this list contains some awamir and some nawahi. So when reading it, you can stop on حرم ربكم عليكم and then start with ألا تشركوا به شيئا. But some have suggested maybe you should do the waqf here, أتل ما حرم ربكم and then عليكم ألا تشركوا به شيئا. Now nobody's necessarily saying here that is actually a good wajh or a good tafsir, but what he's saying here is, well, it's not going to be criticized in the same way as عليه أن يطوف بهما, because saying عليكم is actually eloquent, right? So if you criticize it from some other angle, that's fine, but not from this angle. Oh, this is super interesting. I'm not going to get that far, am I?
أهل البيت أنه منصوب على الاختصاص لضعفه بعد ضمير المخاطب. الصواب أنه منادى. ومن قال في قوله تعالى تماما على الذي أحسن بالرفع أن أصله أحسن فحذفت الواو اجتزاء عنها بالضمة لأن باب ذلك الشعر. الصواب تقدير مبتدأ أي هو أحسن. ومن قال في قوله تعالى.
So yeah, these are all interesting cases. We're not going to go into every one in detail. If there's one that you want me to explain, I can do so, inshallah. أحسن تماما على الذي أحسن in the canonical readings. So there's a discussion about what is the i'rab of this non-canonical reading, the shadh reading. So that's fine. I mean, you can spend your time doing i'rab of shawadh readings, and plenty of our scholars did so. And that is all part of the study of the Arabic language, actually.
وإن تصبروا وتتقوا لا يضركم بضم الراء المشددة إنه من باب إنك إن يسرع أخوك تسرعي لأن ذلك خاص بالشعر. الصواب أنها ضمة اتباع وهو مجزوم. ومن قال في قوله تعالى وأرجلكم إنه مجرور على الجوار لأن الجر على الجوار في نفسه ضعيف شاذ لم يرد منه إلا أحرف يسيرة. الصواب أنه معطوف على برؤوسكم على أن المراد به مسح الخف.
Okay, famous موضع we have in some of the قراءات متواترة, Ibn Kathir, Abu Amr, Shu'bah, Hamza, Abu Ja'far, and Khalaf. وأرجلكم إلى الكعبين, right? So وامسحوا برؤوسكم وأرجلكم على الكعبين. Now, because وامسحوا برؤوسكم, so this jar gives the appearance of being معطوف على رؤوسكم. So then wipe your heads, or wipe some of your heads, if you understand the bad for tabaid. And then وأرجلكم, and wipe your feet to the ankles. Now, because the Jumhur and Ahl Sunnah in general are not wiping the feet but washing the feet, so they have to understand that what's intended here is wash your feet to the ankles. So then they have an idea about then why does it appear to be majroor? So some of them said it's for jiwar. So just simply, and they mention some lines of poetry, but he's saying here there are very few cases like that. He's saying in poetry. So the idea would be just to make it comfortable to read, almost وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلِكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْن. The other reading, of course, وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْن, which then goes back to فَاغْسِلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ وَأَيْدِيَكُمْ إِلَى الْمَرَافِقِ وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُمْ وَأَرْجُلَكُمْ إِلَى الْكَعْبَيْن takes you back to the ghasl, right? The correct analysis, he says, is that the word is conjoined to wipe your heads and pertains specifically to wiping the leather sock. That can be criticized from some other angles. But the idea here, and this is a bit like the very modern tendency among some to explain the multiple qira'at as each one pertains to something, and they are complementary and they are increasing the meaning. So they say in the normal situations, you are following the qira'ah of nasb. Okay, so you wash your feet, but when you are wearing khuf, then you can follow the reading of jar. And even then, do you wipe to the ankles? Is that okay? I'm not going to overanalyze this, but let's just say there is some فيه نظر around this.
قال ابن هشام: وقد يكون الموضع لا يتخرج إلا على وجه مرجوح، فلا حرج على مخرجه كقراءة ننجي المؤمنين. قيل الفعل ماض ويضعفه إسكان آخره وإنابة ضمير المصدر على الفاعل مع وجود المفعول به. وقيل مضارع أصله ننجي بسكون الثانية ويضعفه أن النون لا تدغم في الجيم. وقيل أصله ننجي بفتح الثانية وتشديد الثالثة فحذفت النون ويضعفه أن ذلك لا يجوز إلا في التاء.
Right. This is so fun for me, by the way, coming back to this after having studied more tafsir in the intervening 5 or 6 years and dealt with some things in qira'at and translation and so on. So, Nunji is the reading of Al-Hasan al-Shanabudi. No, sorry, that's a different footnote I'm looking at there. It's the reading of Ibn Amir and Shu'bah. Right, there's this one, and then there's a different situation in Surah Yusuf. But here in Al-Anbiya, Nunji, it's tricky. It's tricky to interpret this, to do takhrij of it. Perhaps the clearest is basically that it's idgham. So in this, I remember reading As-Samin al-Halabi, and he has these different points of view about it. But there's even a very tricky one. That it's a perfect verb in passive voice. Yes, this is very tricky. Let me see. This is upon the explanation that its deeper structures nunjiya, al-inja'u or an-naja'u, al-mu'minin, with the postulated middle word, the verbal now standing in lieu of the agent due to the passive form, and simultaneously acting upon the object. Wallahi, when I was looking into this more recently, I'd forgotten that I've translated this in the past, and I supposedly knew about it. But there you go. So the Bridges translation if you're interested, actually kind of goes with that. So let's see. But I would question whether that amount of thought process was exerted on this, but let's see. So we responded to him and delivered him from stress, for thus we save the believers. That's the reading, the common reading. وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, with the extra noon, because the as you can see here, the rasam of it is like this. It's got noon and then jim and ya. كذلك, if you're reading it as نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, you have to do a kind of taqdeer of an extra noon, which is muhtamal, يعني it's khafif, right? In the way that you read vowels onto the words, and an extra noon or something is not considered to be a big deal in terms of agreeing with the rasm. In the next session, inshallah, we'll see some issues about rasm and some narrations around that. وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Right? This is a famous ayah with our waw al-tarahi. There's no waw al-tarahi, right? فَاسْتَجَبْنَا لَهُ وَنَجَّيْنَاهُ مِنَ الْغَمِّ وَكَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So he translates it, Sayyid Fadl Suleiman translates it as, for thus we save the believers. In the footnote, he says regarding the other reading, which he doesn't quote, كَذَلِكَ نُنْجِي الْمُؤْمِنِينَ, he says, and thus the believers were saved. Ibn Amir and Shu'ba read it as, and thus the believers were saved. So the basic problem with that is, first of all, iskan al-ya, a bit strange. Second problem would be al-mu'minin is either mansub or majroor. It cannot be marfu'. You'd have to say nujjiya al-mu'minun. Nujjiya al-mu'minun. But there is a deep magic which can rescue this reading or this interpretation, which is to say, كَذَلِكَ نُجِّيَ النَّجَاءُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. So, but this is not amongst the best awjuh of interpreting it. Right, so I might say, نُجِّيَ الْإِنْجَاءُ. I think I might say النَّجَاءُ al-mu'mineen, with the postulated middle word, the verbal noun, standing in lieu of the agent due to the passive form and simultaneously acting upon the object. Yeah. So what he's saying is sometimes, oh, nobody pointed Ibn Hisham. How that happened. Sometimes there isn't a clear wajh available. You've got to reach for something. That's the best that you can do. We saw the example before of alla yasjudu lillah, but more ala yasjudu lillah. Ala yasjudu lillah. The only way to really make sense of it is ala ya usjudu lillah. Right? Verse 88 of Surah An-Naml, right? So the only no, it's not 88. The only way to really make sense of it is ala ya usjudu. But you might say that's difficult to maintain. Verse 25 of Surah An-Naml, right, which we talked about before, under Allah and Allah. So essentially his point is, you might sometimes explain things in a way that is basically marjuh.
الأمر الخامس أن يستوفي جميع ما يحتمله اللفظ من الأوجه الظاهرة، فتقول في نحو سبح اسم ربك الأعلى يجوز كون الأعلى صفة للرب وصفة للاسم، وفي نحو هدى للمتقين الذين يجوز كون الذين تابعا ومقطوعا إلى النصب بإضمار أعني أو أمدح، وإلى الرفع بإضمار هو.
Okay, so this is a support for the idea of multiplicity, recognizing it and sharing it with your reader, making it possible for them to make the choice between the awjuh, which are decent awjuh, right? All the apparent ones, right? Al-awjuh al-zahira, that is to say, things that fit the criteria that are mentioned above. It doesn't mean there's just going to be one i'rab that is ظاهر and hasan, right? So this is a bit like what I said to you, لقد رأى من آيات ربه الكبرى, where the position of al-a'la is not fixed as one option only. It's either, I must have it here, the name of your Lord Most High, so al-a'la being sifatul Rabb, or it can be sifatul ism, as it says sabbih, the highest name of your Lord, right?
الأمر السادس أن يراعي الشروط المختلفة بحسب الأبواب، ومتى لم يتأملها اختلطت عليه الأبواب والشرائط، ومن ثم خطئ الزمخشري في قوله تعالى ملك الناس إله الناس أنهما عطف بيان، والصواب أنهما نعتان لاشتراط الاشتقاق في النعت والجمود في عطف البيان. وفي قوله تعالى إن ذلك لحق تخاصم أهل النار بنصب تخاصم إنه صفة للإشارة، لأن اسم الإشارة إنما ينعت بذي اللام الجنسية، والصواب كونه بدلا. وفي قوله تعالى فاستبقوا الصراط، وفي قوله سنعيدها سيرتها، أن المنصوب فيهما ظرف، لأن ظرف المكان شرطه الإبهام، والصواب أنه على إسقاط الجار توسعا، وهو فيهما إلى. وفي قوله تعالى ما قلت لهم إلا ما أمرتني به أن اعبدوا الله، أني مصدرية، وهي وصلتها عطف بيان على الهاء لامتناع عطف البيان على الضمير كنعته، وهذا الأمر السادس عده ابن هشام في المغني، ويحتمل دخوله في الأمر الثاني. الأمر السابع أن يراعى.
Okay, so here we get a clearer sense that he's summarizing Ibn Hisham, right? Because he's saying you can consider this part of point 2. I was just thinking that. It might be that al-Suyuti put it in my head all these years ago. But number 2, if you remember, was to have a broad grasp of the Arabic language, isn't it? Yeah. Oh no, okay. Observing the rules particular to this craft. Okay, so having it as a separate point maybe is just to highlight, it's khas ba'da am, that what can happen is that you confuse different cases in different areas of i'rab. And that's what I told you once before, وَخُطِّئَ الزَّمَخْشَرِي, this is scholarship, people are advancing detailed arguments and people are responding to those, and it's a beautiful thing.
في كل تركيب ما يشاكله، فربما خرج كلاما على شيء ويشهد استعمال آخر في نظير ذلك الموضع بخلافه. ومن ثم خطئ الزمخشري في قوله تعالى ومخرج الميت من الحي، إنه عطف على فالق الحب والنوى، ولم يجعله معطوفا على يخرج الحي من الميت، لأن عطف الاسم على الاسم أولى، ولكن مجيء قوله يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي بالفعل فيهما في سورة النور يدل على خلاف ذلك. ومن ثم خطئ من قال في ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه، إن الوقف على ريب وفيه خبر هدى، ويدل على خلاف ذلك في سورة السجدة تنزيل الكتاب لا ريب فيه من رب العالمين.
Beautiful, right. So a famous one, beginning of Surah Al-Baqarah. Do you stop here? ذلك الكتاب لا ريب فيه هدى للمتقين. The only thing that makes me at all tempted to do that is so that I can then say الذين يؤمنون بالغيب, and it rhymes. It's nice, okay? But other than that, meaning-wise, some do consider this marjuh because then it's فيه هدى للمتقين, and it's أبلغ to say هو هدى للمتقين, right? That the Quran is huda. Because it's the earlier books that, fihi hudan wa nur, right? The Quran is huda and it is nur, right? So that's an argument that some of the mufassirin make for saying, no, the waqf is on fihi, la rayba fihi, and then huda lil-muttaqeen. And huda lil-muttaqeen can either be like a new sentence, huwa huda lil-muttaqeen, or it can be a khabar for ذلك الكتاب, depending on how you read this, the different possibilities. But here the point about The pause is that in this other ayah, you cannot make such a stop, right? تنزيل الكتاب لا ريب فيه من رب العالمين, that would not work. So what that tells you is لا ريب فيه is like a Quranic phrase, and that's how we should read it also in Surah Al-Baqarah. Is that a clincher argument? No, because as I always say with regards to tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, just because something is like that over there doesn't mean it's necessarily like that here, but it is indicative of something in the way that I worded it, that is la rayba fihi is intended as a phrase. I'll give you another example that comes to my mind. So some of the so-called Quran-only Quranist people, they like to say regarding Surah Al-Isra, وَجَعَلْنَا عَلَى قُلُوبِهِمْ أَكِنَّةً أَن يَفْقَهُوا وَفِي آذَانِهِمْ وَقْرًا وَإِذَا ذَكَرْتَ رَبَّكَ فِي الْقُرْآنِ وَحْدَهُ وَلَّوْا عَلَى أَدْبَارِهِمْ نُفُورًا. Right? وَإِذَا ذَكَرْتَ رَبَّكَ فِي الْقُرْآنِ وَحْدَهُ. So they say, Quran only! Quran only is in the Quran! وَإِذَا ذَكَرْتَ رَبَّكَ فِي الْقُرْآنِ وَحْدَهُ, يعني قرآن وحده ولا ربك وحده. وَإِذَا ذَكَرْتَ رَبَّكَ وَحْدَهُ فِي الْقُرْآنِ. So the clearest proof of this then, let's just do a quick search for the word وحده in the Quran. Oh, this more than I had thought. But the one I mentioned was Al-Isra 46. But then look to Az-Zumar 45. وَإِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَحْدَهُ اشْمَأَزَّتْ قُلُوبُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ وَإِذَا ذُكِرَ الَّذِينَ مِن دُونِهِ إِذَا هُمْ يَسْتَبْشِرُونَ. So the phrase then is ذِكْرُ اللَّهِ وَحْدَهُ. وَإِذَا ذُكِرَ اللَّهُ وَحْدَهُ اشْمَأَزَّتْ قُلُوبُ الَّذِينَ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْآخِرَةِ. So هذا يرجح المعنى في إذا ذكرت ربك في القرآن وحده. And in the first place, I'm curious now, maybe to look into the tafsir of it a bit. Like, has anyone sensible in the past read this as in the Quran only? Because what would that even mean to people before our strange modern times? أي غير مقرون بذكره ذكر شيء من آلهتهم التي يزعمون كما كانوا يقولون بالله تعالى واللات مثلا. ووحده عند زمن المصدر الثلاثي. Okay. Yes, I doubt that anyone sensible or in the past has said Quran only is what is meant in that ayah. Right? So we're showing you how to do good tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran and to make good arguments based on it.
ومن قال في قوله تعالى ولمن صبر وغفر إن ذلك لمن عزم الأمور إن الرابط الإشارة وإن الصابر والغافر جعل من عزم الأمور مبالغة والصواب أن الإشارة للصبر والغفران بدليل وإن تصبروا وتتقوا فإن ذلك من عزم الأمور ولم يقل إنكم. ومن قال في نحو قوله تعالى وما ربك بغافل إن المجرور في موضع رفع والصواب أنه في موضع نصب لأن الخبر لم يجئ مجردا من الباء إلا وهو منصوب. ومن قال في قوله تعالى ولئن سألتهم من خلقهم ليقولن الله إن الاسم الكريم مبتدأ الصواب أنه فاعل بدليل ليقولن خلقهن العزيز العليم. تنبيه: وكذا إذا جاءت قراءة أخرى في ذلك الموضع بعينه تساعد أحد الإعرابين فينبغي أن يترجح كقوله تعالى ولكن البر من آمن قيل التقدير ولكن ذا البر وقيل ولكن البر بر من آمن ويؤيد الأول أنه قرئ ولكن البار. تنبيه: وقد يوجد ما يرجح كلا من المحتملات فينظر في أولاهما.
So let's just pause here. We're going to stop, I think, after this rule, just so that we can break this into two even parts, inshallah. So this note here, the first تنبيه, إذا جاءت قراءة أخرى في ذلك الموضع بعينه. So in the first place, he's saying to compare it with other occurrences in the Quran. That's the type of tafsir of Quran bil-Quran. then you could do something like tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran if there are other qira'at, even of the same ayah. There could be other qira'at of other ayahs, or even other qira'at of the same ayah. Does it help to push your decision in a certain direction? Now, if that qira'ah is a qira'ah sab'iyya, ashariyya, then we could call it tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, right? Although, يعني I still have some في نفسي من ذلك شيء, but we could call that tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran. If you're doing tafsir or i'rab based on qira'ah shadda, then no one will say the qira'ah shadda is Quran, so then we could not call it tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, right? Now, the example he gives here, how do we interpret ليس البر, what is it? He's not given the whole thing. ليس البر أن تولوا وجوهكم قبل المشرق والمغرب ولكن البر من آمن. So this phrase, causes you to scratch your head a little bit. Bir, righteousness, is whoever believes. So some of them said, you do taqdeer like this. ليس البر أن تولوا ولكن ذا البر, the person of righteousness, is man amana. Okay. Some of them said no. We prefer to do taqdeer like this. ولكن البر بر من آمن. Okay. So those who are of the first view, they can say, well, there's another reading of this ayah. ولكن البار من آمن. البار is like saying ذا البر. Okay, so this qira'ah strengthens that point of view. Okay. Another example that would come to mind, although I don't know if it would fit here exactly in this discussion, but we discussed about وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَالرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ يَقُولُونَ. Right? So that's the standard reading, and that's the one that corresponds with the Uthmanic rasm. This one, the way لكن البارة, it corresponds with the Uthmanic rasm because it's not hard to transpose the alif, right? But in this reading of Ali Imran, there's, as they say in the Mus'haf of Ubay or something like this, they say, some of them said, وَمَا يَعْلَمُ تَأْوِيلَهُ إِلَّا اللَّهُ وَيَقُولُ الرَّاسِخُونَ فِي الْعِلْمِ آمَنَّا بِهِ كُلٌّ مِنْ عِنْدِ رَبِّنَا. So if you read it like that, you cannot do the atf anymore. It cannot be Allah knows and the Rasikhun knows. No. So then it would have to be separated that only Allah knows. But in the way that it is in the Qira'at Mutawatira and the Uthmanic Rasm, the ihtimal is there for the waqf, which would be waqf lazim for those who assert that, or for wasl for those who take the view that the Rasikhun can also know the ta'wil of the mutashabih, and that depends then what the mutashabih is understood to be. So here that goes back to what we said right at the beginning. What is the mutashabih? Therefore, is it something that can be known? Therefore, what is the i'rab and the waqf? You see how it follows in this direction. Much as we'd like to think, you receive it first and then you interpret it. Note, each of several interpreters may have evidence to support it. Right.
فاجعل بيننا وبينك موعدا فموعدا محتمل للمصدر ويشهد له لا نخلفه نحن ولا أنت ومحتمل للزمان ويشهد له قال موعدكم يوم الزينة ومحتمل للمكان ويشهد له مكانا سوى وإذا أعرض مكانا بدلا منه لا ظرفا لنخلقه تعين ذلك لا ظرفا لنخلفه تعين ذلك.
Okay, so I won't go into this specific example, but the point is, as I mentioned to you before, I think يرجح does not necessarily mean to actually make it the correct one or to mean that it's necessarily the right one. Sometimes the scholars will say about one opinion ويرجحه كذا, and the other opinion they will say ويرجح هذا الآية الفلانية, right? So the tarjih just means in this case strengthening the view, supporting each view, right? Supporting each wajh, right? So sometimes there's evidence for each, and then you just have to decide. Not you, but the mu'rib, whoever he or she may be, the mu'ribah, has to decide which they are most convinced of, right? And that is where we will pause, inshallah, until tomorrow. وآخر دعوانا أن الحمد لله رب العالمين.